You'll give us the same. Okay. Okay, I'm waiting to see my image. Here we go. Why is it when the orchids are dying, they smell the sweetest? As when our bodies are declining, we find them the most beautiful. We memorialize our defects, cling to them with few petals remain, when few petals remain. We cannot fake that hint of disappointment behind the eyes, or uncrease the furrows of brows that uprooted deep thoughts concerning the melancholic misalignment between classical and pop culture. We graciously allow more space for the body, the widening of the feet, collapsed arches that hike many trails, even follow the steps of Mark Antony, tripping over uneven Roman stones. We refused to accept we are the misbegotten byproducts of an empire that only worships the young. Yet each year we squeeze a bit more foundation out of seductive tubing. There's something beautiful about aging most people refuse to see. But as long as you and I do, who cares? We're all of us orchids. We're all of us orchids. A love poem to middle age, a poem from the collection of tonight's guest, Sean Hanrahan. The title of the book is Headless. Welcome to Philly Loves Poetry, a collaboration between the Moonstone Arts Center of Philadelphia and Moonstone. The purpose of our program is to give our viewers the experience of the rich culture of poetry in the city of Philadelphia. And so we have a guest who has been a prior guest on Philly Loves Poetry with me a couple of times, and he's a definite mainstay in the Philadelphia poetry community, and that's Sean Hanrahan. Sean is a Philadelphia poet. He's originally from Dale City, Virginia. Sean is the author of Headless, which we will be talking about tonight. It was published by Collapse Press. The full-length collection Safer Behind Popcorn, which was published in 2019 by Cajun Mutt, and Ghost Signs, published in 2023 by Alien Buddha. And he has published chapbooks, Hardened Eyes on the Scan, which was published by Moonstone in 2018, and Gay Cake, published in 2020 by Tohu. Sean's work has also been included in various anthologies and journals. He has taught classes titled A Chapbook in 49 Days, Ekphatic Poetry, Poetry Embodied, and he has hosted and read at poetry events throughout Philadelphia. Sean can be found on Instagram as Gay Cake Poet. So welcome, Sean. Great to have you back again.
Thanks for having me, Charles. Nice to be in the studio.
Yeah. So, the last time, excuse me, I had you on, we actually talked about Safer Behind Popcorn, and I just would like to know how do you put Headless with this? I mean, how is it you feel it's a development within your poetry collection? How's it different? How is it, and how is it unique right now to your to the art of your poetry?
Sure. Well, it continues Safer Behind Popcorn in one way, is that it's very much an ekphrastic piece of poetry or book of poetry. So I think that's kind of the thread. I definitely dwell in the ekphrastic area and like relate art to my life. This one expands, I think, the definition of art. Safer Behind Popcorn was film, occasional TV. Whereas this is like taking on legends and myths, and the myths and legends usually centering masculinity or the lack of it. And that's what I've been exploring in my work lately is just where do legends and how can we queer them and where do they intersect with either my life or the life of the community right now?
Okay, so let's talk about the title,
Mm-hmm.
Headless, and why you selected that and how that applies to this collection.
Sure. Well, this collection started, and I'll read the opening poem during a little bit later in the program. But Headless is kind of an erotic fantasy and terror about the headless horseman. So that's I think where the initial idea for the title came from. But then I think about it, and I'll read Guillotine as well. It seems like society right now there's a bunch of chickens running around without heads, right? Like we're not really given time. We don't give ourselves time to think. And that's where Headless kind of comes. It's like we've sort of removed our minds from our bodies. I'm also interested in the separation of the mind and the body and the combination of the mind and the body. But I think that's where it kind of relates. I think is just this idea of I don't think there is a head leader or, even our own minds. I think we're just kind of overwhelmed, bombarded maybe, and we're not seeing a lot of mindfulness or, things being thought through at the moment.
Before we go on, because I don't think all of our viewers understand the term ekphrastic, and you're beyond what maybe those who say they understand ekphrastic goes. A lot of people think of ekphrastic poetry of just applying to paintings or sculpture, but it's much more than that.
Absolutely. Ekphrastic started with, I think, the Greek, and I think it was when they decided, when they would tell stories or poems about the battles, they did it in such a way that you could visualize the battle or the scene, the victory, the legend, the myth. And then, yes, it was mostly related to visual arts, but I expanded, I think it's any art form, and maybe up to and including poetry, but especially art forms that aren't necessarily poetry, like, so, you know, film, like in Safer Behind Popcorn, music can be ekphrastic. So I use it to include all the arts. I know some people define it more narrowly than I do, but I think I take it in an ekphrastic poem. I think you always got to weight yourself to the artwork. Like, are you in the artwork? Are you outside the artwork? Are you usually the best poems indicate movement of some way? So am I the speaker, I, not necessarily me, I, stepping into the art or stepping out of the art? And I always try to relate my poem to that and just get details. And usually if it's visual art or if it's a song or if it's a movie, I try to play it and then write a poem to it. So I try to get all the details and see which ones fit into what I'm trying to say.
Okay. Uh, you define yourself, in the genre of queer poetry. And when I went, investigating or searching for, perhaps a broader description, of queer poetry, I encountered two elements, that were mentioned. One was form, and the title was Form and Subversion. It says queer poetry often messes with expectations using form, and it says form reflects the complexity of queer life and resistance. And then it says joy versus trauma. While navigating themes of danger, much contemporary queer poetry also focuses on joy, love, and intimacy. So does that fit with, talked about your perspective?
Sure. Well, formally, I don't think I subvert form itself, like the shape of the poem, the look of the poem, that much. But I think I do subvert expectations because I take some of these characters are canonically queer, some of them aren't. So putting a queer perspective behind them, like Stephen Dedalus, he could be read as gay, absolutely. I just make that more blatant in one of the poems in this collection. Telemachus, nothing in the Odyssey necessarily indicates he's queer, but I sort of put myself in him a little bit, so I think that makes it queer. But absolutely, I think the mix of joy and trauma is absolutely right. I think queer joy is resistance in a country that often shuts us down. And then there's there's things growing up in America as a queer person, as a gay person, that it's going to shape your worldview, and that's where I think I approach the queerness from. Is my worldview isn't necessarily the mainstream heteronormative worldview, so I try to find the queerness in unexpected places. I guess I think all queer poets do.
Uh, I don't know whether it's in the book or some. It might have been on the back of the book. One reviewer characterized this book, your book, as a love poem to middle age. You know, like, of course, I read that poem, but you know, he's kind of characterizing the whole book as that. I really didn't see it that way. Maybe I'm blind to it, but how do you react to that statement?
Oh gosh,
I didn't really understand the comment after I got done reading the book.
Oh, okay. Interesting. I'm not really sure. But that one poem is kind of, based on my own life experience, right? I turned 48 and I read an interesting article that says we tend to mature much faster at the ages of 46 and 64. Like, aging isn't necessarily gradual. There's huge leaps at that time. And I think the time I wrote that poem was about 46. I forget who blurbed that, so my apologies. But the person who blurbed that, I think a lot of my stuff had dealt with me as younger when it was dealing with me. Not every single poem deals with me. Whereas this is like, yeah, I'm confronting middle age head on. And maybe it's just a maturation in work, which I hope is what's happening. And also just, okay, I'm 48 now, and maybe I was 46, 47 when I wrote this book. So I'm going to be approaching things not necessarily from a younger perspective, but from a middle-aged perspective. So, but I guess maybe. And maybe a little bit older than my other books. Outlook, I guess.
With Headless, what is your expectation for your reader? If you said, you would be satisfied if a reader, after, reading all your poems, came away with something, and would it match up to maybe what Sean wanted to? I know the authors don't, like sell their books on, having a yes or no or true or false exam. You failed the test. You didn't understand my poem. But what was your expectation, or what is your expectation?
Oh gosh. Well, I'm kind of this school. Of course, I want to guide the reader as much to what I want them to discover as I do. But I'm also open to people can have their own interpretations. I read somewhere, I can't remember where, and I would credit it if I remember, middle-aged memory, is once an artist releases their work, it no longer belongs to them. It belongs to the public. One thing I hope they take away is just how can they place themselves in legends and myths? What are current legends and myths? There's a couple poems in this book that talk about war, which is very relevant now, as you know. What is the myth of war? If you know the myth and the myth making surrounding a subject, maybe you can start to change it. That's what I would love if anyone read this book, could start thinking about, like, how do we dismantle war? How do we dismantle the patriarchy? That may not be what they do, but if any seeds sown in their mind, or at least just challenging the status quo. And also, how do we glue our heads back on, right? Like, how do we get through this moment where it does seem like things are unraveling, or can we? But how can we go about that in a different way, perhaps? So maybe just challenging what you've always believed to be true about some of these legends, or, like I said, the broader themes, and then see if that changes anything in your response to current events or past events.
I got it. There are people, with poetry in this country that'll say, well, so what? What does poetry really accomplish? What does poetry really do? I don't actually have an answer for that myself. But, poetry, or some poems, some poets have moved, the kind of the meter in a way. How do you feel about that, expression that people say, well, so what poetry?
So why poetry? Yeah. Well, it doesn't reach as many people as maybe some other art forms do. I think maybe some of that's related to how it's taught. Like you're taught like meter and form, and I remember being taught poetry, and that's very useful information to have. But it can like how you're taught math. Like this is the answer, and this is what it is. And sometimes poetry, I think, is taught similar to that. So maybe it turns people off. Um, but I think I was reading somewhere else. I'm so bad at remembering the authors of these articles, but that more people are turning to poetry, partly because I think our attention span as a culture has gotten less. So poems can maybe be read and understood. And you look around Philly, for example, there's a lot of poetry events all over the city and all sorts of people participating. But that being said, the culture at large, there's definitely poets like Amanda Gorman, who's made a huge impact lately. So there's definitely poets who are doing that, but I don't think it's not like, I don't know, like Netflix that permeates millions of households. But what does it do? I think it at least fosters community. It lets people express their thoughts in hopefully a productive and helpful way to them, and to maybe other people who listen to them. Because Moonstone every Wednesday has poetry readings. Different numbers of people turn up, but at least for those 2 hours, people are attuned to the word. And this happens all over Philadelphia with different events, and all over the country, I assume, with just different places where people can find that community, express themselves. And to me, I think the most important thing about making art personally is making art. Hopefully people read it. Hopefully, it gets as popular as it can get. But that's a side effect, not, I think, why a lot of poets do it.
Um, I just read, as part of a workshop, prompt, a poem by Wallace Stevens. And along with the poem, there was a extensive analysis of the poem. And I read the poem, and I read the poem. I gave the poem to someone else to read, and I said, what do you think of this? And they said, geez, Charles, it's got a lot of great language, but I'm completely lost here. And in a way, I got more lost in the analysis of it than in the actual poem. And so my question comes back to this whole issue of accessibility of poems. Because some people say, well, that's just the way I write. I'm a language poet, or I'm this, that. And that's just me. And if people don't understand it, they don't understand it. How much to you is accessibility something that you set out and say, well, I really want people to really try to understand what I'm trying to communicate here? You're not just writing words.
Yes. I think the goal of poetry is to be understood. Now, I think why people struggle with poetry is it's not always clear. It's not prose, right? It's not like, or directions or instructions all the time that you want people to do A, B, and C, or to think A, B, and C. Sometimes it uses power suggestion. Sometimes it uses nonlinear language, nonlinear narrative, if you want to call it that. Does it provoke a mood in you, right? Like, because sometimes poems do simple as that. I think with some poems, I'm definitely clear. Like, I think the more political ones I write, I want clarity, right? Because I want people to react. I want people to have an emotion or opinion. Something more lyric, or something like, I've written a couple poems that have just come to me, and I'm not even 100% sure I understand them myself, but hopefully someone does. But I do see how analysis can be really tricky, because you're also, when you read an analysis of a poem, that's exactly what you're reading, one person's interpretation of it, which may or may not be well researched into the concerns of the poet, but that's still their interpretation. It doesn't have to be yours. That's one thing I do like about poetry is there's probably 100 different ways to interpret any poem, and you're not incorrect.
Right. So let's talk about your discipline and your process for writing poetry. Can you share with our audience and with other poets? This is how I go about the business of my poetry. Some people say, well, I wake up at 6 in the morning and I go for 3 hours. have my coffee, and then I go about the rest of my day. And we have other people might say, I wait for a poem to come to me, and that's how I go about it. So that's number one. And who are the poets that have helped shape your art?
Sure. First question. I'm not that disciplined. I do write quite a bit. I kind of, as an idea strikes me, sometimes it's just a line, just an image, just a thought, not necessarily poetically worth it, really, but just like, oh, write about this, maybe. It's like a to-do list almost. But then I write it down. I type it into my phone first most of the time. Then I write it into a journal. And then I go through that journal and like, okay, I have this idea. Sometimes the ideas get lost. I'm like, I don't know what I was thinking here. But sometimes I'll take the idea and play with it maybe months later. I kind of write when I have time. I think, in this day and age, it's not that it's harder, but it feels like it's harder. I think we fill our time with different things like TV, cell phone, social life. But I definitely make the best use of my time. But I realize I can write in like 2 hour, maybe 3 hour chunks, and then I'm done. The creative part, I could probably edit all day. So I don't know if it's the disciplined answer people want to hear, but it comes when it comes. But I do spend time on it. And if I'm like, oh, I can't really write today, then maybe I'll go back and edit poems. Because I think you also have to be in the right headspace. And then the second part of the question was poets who shaped me. Well, Sylvia Plath, who's referenced a couple times in this current collection, is probably number one. She's the reason I'm a poet. Moonstone did an anthology about her, and the poem After Ariel in this collection, which I will read tonight, deals with, the poem Ariel by Sylvia Plath. Mark Doty has been a huge influence on me as a gay poet. There's times, he writes poems and I'm like, oh, I wish I could have written that, but Mark did, and he did it more beautifully than I ever could. Hart Crane has been an inspiration for me, another gay modernist poet. I don't necessarily write that way, but there's been one or two poems I'm like, oh, okay, it makes about as much sense as Hart Crane's poems do. I love him, but didn't always understand his poetry. Sonia Sanchez has been a huge influence of just how direct she is about politics. And you definitely know what Sonia's saying at any given time, which I've always appreciated. Nikki Giovanni, I love her deceptively simple language. I wish I could do a bit more of that, but I tend to use as many adjectives or adverbs as the sentence will allow, but I would like to go back to maybe a little pared down, maybe in another collection. Those are just a few people I've thought of.
Yeah, and reading your poetry, both this and your previous collection, you really do have a love of language and a real capability with language, which, when I'm thinking about, when I'm sitting there reading, I say, Sean must read a lot, both poetry and otherwise, because you have a kind of rich vocabulary, and it's nice to, experience that. So that's quite an impressive group of influences, that you have. One of the things that you have talked about, and one of the things I find very fascinating, in your collection is these personas that you create, and it's essentially a world that you invite people into and a conversation through these personas that you build. And I find that's a very unique characteristic of both of the books that I've read. So talk about that.
Oh gosh, well, I'm kind of a failed actor. I did do some drama in high school, but I realized I was never going to be good enough to maybe go as far as people may want to go. So I like persona. I think it allows you room to explore things. Like, it's not in this collection, and I'm not going to read it tonight, but one time I was at microplastics as persona. So I think it's really interesting to pretend, get in the mind of, well, this is an object, right? Microplastics, of something or someone else, and kind of put your own slant on it, right? Because it's always going to be you at the end of the day, whether you take a persona or not. It's always going to be filtered through you. So I think it just gives you a way. It's definitely a good way to unblock any sort of, if you have any creative blocks, is like, okay, let me imagine this as microplastics. what would they say about it? What would they think about it? But I also think it's just a way maybe to examine something you wouldn't get to just on your own. I think, in poetry these days, the I is always assumed to be the poet, but it doesn't have to be. So I think it just gives you a little way, maybe a sneaky, maybe a queer way into something is like, okay, my current manuscript that I'm working on that is out at a few contests called The Art Show, which I'll read a couple poems from. I'm like taking the persona of art. Like one of them, I'm not reading it tonight, unfortunately, but Stolen Mona Lisa. I actually take the persona of the stolen painting of Mona Lisa. So I think it's just a fun way to, get at some truths that maybe you couldn't get to otherwise.
And along with that, you have some popular figures that you're in a conversation with. I mean, Bowie, I love that poem. Talk about that Bowie poem.
Oh gosh. Well, there was a David Bowie exhibit in Brooklyn Museum of Art. That was the first time I've ever stayed at a museum exhibit longer than my husband. My husband can spend all day in a museum. I'm about good for 2 hours, but I did stay in that exhibit longer than my husband. I've always been fascinated by David Bowie because he's kind of, at least in his art, if not personally, kind of multi-gendered, multi-persona, right? He always changed his personas. Just kind of a fascinating touchstone. And I think my first memory, and I'll read the poem tonight, was Labyrinth. And that movie just had a huge influence on me as an artist, as a child, as a human being. So I like talking to, more current, or at least my era current. I guess David Bowie is no longer current. But my generation of things, too. Like, I think the things that reach you in childhood, teenage, adolescence, probably stay with you the longest.
I'm thinking of the other major, and it's escaping me.
Is it Harry Styles?
Well, you have Jim Morrison in here.
Jim Morrison, yeah.
You have Anne Heck in here, which is I find fascinating. Wilfred Owens, Ghost. That's glorious. Who am I thinking of? This Harry Styles, man.
Yeah, that was an interesting poem because basically it was the Vogue cover where he, and I don't know if he's non-binary, I don't know, but he was in a dress, and I thought, and then Billy Porter made a comment about, like, I used to do it, and I would get, things, effectively things thrown at me, right? So it's just interesting who we allow to be certain genders, whether it gets more praise or not. So it was definitely like just seeing those two things side by side in my mind that made me engage with it. So I thought, because there's also an explorer of being either genderful or genderless in this collection as well. So it's just, I thought that was an interesting, I used that poem to figure out how I thought about it. The same with the Anne Heche poem. I wrote that poem to figure out how I felt about Anne Heche. So sometimes poetry helps you figure things out.
Okay. The other really fascinating part of your collection is mythology, and you mentioned that in your opening comments. But one of the things that I really like about it, it kind of forces me to take one of these big anthologies of mythology from Greek mythology, Roman mythology, Celtic, Norse, whatever, off the shelf, and start reading that stuff again. So for me, it's good because I don't keep all that in here. But you, interestingly enough, use mythology. I'm using the word mediate these poems and mediate your relationship to mythology. Can you talk about that?
Sure. So in the book I say I puncture myth, but in order to puncture myth, like to maybe create new myths or at least shift perceptions on the existing myths, you actually have to go back and use the myths, right, when they're relevant. And when I'm writing a collection, I tend to start to gather, at least in my mind, all the things I could use, like a toolbox, right? So I have Pandora mentioned in a poem. I have Zeus mentioned in another poem. I think it's just bringing those things in because the interesting thing about myths is, especially I think the Greek ones, most of us in the United States anyway, learn them in school. So everyone has an idea, even if you don't know 100% or remember 100%, you know who Zeus kind of is, you know who Pandora is. So those myths bring a richness to your poem, right? They bring another level that people either may have to go back and reread the myth, but you can bring that myth into your poem and people will have, oh, I remember Pandora. Oh, yeah. And then maybe reader could engage with the poem more because you're bringing it back maybe an early memory they had, like from school.
One of the things, of course, or final thing before we go to you actually reading your poems, is the G.I. Joe poem, which I find very powerful in reckoning with your own identity at a certain period of your life, and almost I kind of take it reckoning with having to kind of take on that interest as a survival, way. Not necessarily this is who, Sean wanted to be, but Sean was kind of by pressure forced in a way to be that. And I guess we all were in some way. Can you talk about that? G.I. Joe?
Sure, because I grew up in the 80s, and the 80s, as most people who grew up then probably know, it was a very gender normative time. So if you were a boy, you were expected to act like a boy, play with boy toys. If you were a girl, the same thing. And I realized I kind of liked, I probably liked a bit of both, but I was kind of forced into playing with the more masculine toys. So I think it deals with that and realizing, well, that I think I was always a bit effeminate, so it's not like that totally went away, but I definitely had to learn to maybe curb that a little bit. I don't know how successful I was, but I had to, to be accepted, to not be bullied, to not be, potentially, fortunately this never happened to me, beat up. I had to take on at least a more masculine persona, whether how masculine it is up to doubt, but it's that realization really early on. There's things I can't like. There's things I can't do. There's things I can't express. And that first moment of that is kind of heartbreaking, I guess, for any child who goes through that.
Yeah. When I read that and thinking about that, how there's so much stereotyping, like, well, this is way really a gay child lives, or this is what they're interested in. So, they would not be interested in war or military or something. I think that's a myth. And I don't think everything's, necessarily being done as a protective strategy, but something that they really admire or enjoy, and they should be accepted for that rather than, oh boy, that's not your persona. Well, it is. This is what I chose to like. It's almost like I had a relative, a cousin, and everybody thought, oh, well, he's into dolls. Well, he was into a lot more than dolls. And it's funny how that became a characterization and that people hung on him. And, that bothers me. It really does. So I think you talk about these stereotyping, of, ways of being. So, but I really enjoy how you use the mythology to mediate you, but also mediate in these poems. I think it's very, very successful. And to me, I really like, the use of mythology in poetry. So, we're at that wonderful time when we can talk around your poems, but now people are going to have the opportunity to listen to you read your poems. So the floor is yours, my friend.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you again for this opportunity. I'll start with the title poem, Headless. Witch cackles, frog croaks, a harrowing clop clop. Fiendish demons top the branches, waft satanic musk of midnight through flickering gloom of forest. A sudden looming, giant on horseback, head thrust forward like an offering. He's come again, the horseman, a tall tail stretched to threaten. I've dreamt of his neck, hands collaring my neck. Is it sexual, my demise? He comes back when I least expect him. Alone I sing the songs of my youth. Charms for protection against mutilation. It cannot stop his galloping. He will fling his gourd to knock me off balance. Assault with a deadly legend. Last taste of his flesh. He won't care where I go after this, as long as I am driven back from his lust. A stallion can only keep so many mares. And the time I swallowed him lives within his hell-fire eyes. He can no longer rationalize his masculinity without scarring me. The next poem I'm going to read is titled Bowie's Bitch. It was published by Hoot Review and nominated for Best of the Net, so thank you, Hoot Review. I was Bowie's bitch. I saw what his crotch could do in Labyrinth. I absorbed his queerness, reflected it back stronger. I dyed my hair red and became an alien for a decade. Most people could not understand me, but that was okay. I was Bowie's bitch. I used my unconventional face, my unlovable body to project phantasmagoric fashion fantasies. I read esoteric texts and used computer-generated verse to explicate my position of being Bowie's bitch. The man who fell to earth and fucked a rock star singing along to Martha and the Vandellas. I aerosoled cryptic apocalyptic graffiti on people's souls. I stretched and grew as an artist even when I would not allow myself the grace to change. I was mutable in artistic space because I was Bowie's bitch. I stretched and tried to do his bidding that was really my own since I appropriated him to my own ends. I shapeshifted like him, like Madonna. I walked and talked an MTV revolution, yet my parents forbade me to watch it. I cannot remember when I became fascinated by Bowie's codpiece, but I coveted it. I imbibed his leonine features, his otherworldliness, and kept it in check until puberty. I had his confidence for a few years until life stuffed it down and made me forget I was Bowie's bitch. I don't forget anymore, and as much as I love him, it's time to be my own femme mask butch bitch. The next one we discussed recently, G.I. Joe. This was published in One Art. Thank you, One Art. The shape of war felt so foreign to me. He lacked the vitality of synthetic hair I could cut. No lopsided bob to glam the girl up. This brute had bulges that hurt when you tapped him against your palm. The camo colors were so ugly. Nothing you would want to paint a room. I refused to airdrop him into a war zone, shooting everything in sight. I never dreamt of combat. I liked adventure stories, but stopped short of mass destruction. Killing fascinates boys. Woolly mammoths and other large game must be roaming the blood-soaked plains of their imaginations. They certainly were not interested in tiptoeing to London or Paris as my shoeless doll was. So excited, flying through countertop clouds, her feet never touched the ground. Her feet formed for lofty ambitions. My doll and I were going to Hollywood. I wanted something more than the play fighting of ordinary boys. I wanted to be myself, but I was cautioned out of it. I took the scissors and placed them in a drawer alongside the construction paper silhouette of a boy I knew I had to become in order to survive. This next one deals with Greek myth, Telemachus, who's Odysseus' son in the Odyssey. I'll bide my time, wait for his triumph to cool, his beard to whiten, his craftiness to flake off, displaced dandruff of former days, His decrees will shapeshift into the brittle, out-of-touch ravings of an old man, the only one of his generation to survive the war. His stories still entertain men, pigs, and cyclopses, cliffs closing in, but people will tire of these tales or grow jealous and sail off to captain their own epics. I'll watch his courtiers vanish into lesser legends. I have the patience of an abandoned wife. The throne is my overdue birthright. First, it was stolen by my mother's suitors. She loved to tease their cockiness with her diaphanous abstinence. They brought her fresh game meat. Then, my absent father stole it from me, a stranger who smells a bit like me, has feet the same size and shape, but there the resemblance ends. He who demands love he has not earned. Love I cannot give him, even as I grow sentimental, sipping my wine in the dark, comforted by the clash of the sea. I scheme, I plot, I pay strict attention to the Trojan horse tale, even in its 30th retelling. I am my father's son. This next poem is inspired by the biography of Sylvia Plath titled Red Comet, Infestation. It all starts with the waste of a thing, a blade of grass stranded in an envelope, yellowing in the flat white expanse, nature succumbing to malignant whim, the wrong helpmeet in the kitchen searching for a misplaced recipe, my stomach an atlas carrying the weight of the world, Pandora's unhinged box a testament to my stress. Her dreams of other lives awaken me before dawn. I've smothered the alarm in a marmalade of concern. Careworn, I begin each day pacing second-hand carpet, flatter than it was the day before, toenails snagging on a nap of retold lies, harassing phone calls, silent Ouija boards keep me deeply unwanted company. Aborted verses tramp up and down the servant stairs, a creaky cacophony. I look in the cupboard for sustenance, and except for pebbles of mouse shit and rat poison, it's bare. Alone in a manor house, dusted against scuttling intruders, missing the one arachnid with the most fatalistic bite, always to be found in the corners, web-weaving a seductive geometry of funneled crevices and hair strands, sticky like the cheapest perfume. But she has taste enough to carry him off for a love affair. She's been known to hatch her egg-shaped plans on somebody else's china, a mid-century pillager looking for a wedded woman's home to ransack, to kidnap a strapping man across her broad, sophisticated back. Out of cautionary fables, she materializes, appropriating both nature and myth to her design. She is an engorged gorgon about to swallow. Can't you hear her serpentine hair hiss? She has snuffed out the tiniest whisper of hope. In her curious greed, her need to be the only poet who matters, she snuck into my blooming garden to steal my harvest and leave a slug slime trail unhindered by salt. Slithering among the cabbages, the beans spotted too late for any pesticide. For every Lilith, there's an Eve. For every Adam, avoided heart. For every betrayal, a web-swaddled fly. For every opened box, a death.
I just want to stop you. I mean, the music of this poem, the pace and the rhythm of this poem is absolutely remarkable.
Thank you.
I think I told you when we had a little discussion over the phone prior to the show about, focusing on something this small, in this is, I think that's what great poetry is all about. And that out of that very small thing, you can build this, very compelling poetry. And some of the language here that you use is of funneled crevices and hair strands, strictly like the cheapest perfume. I love those lines. I love so many of the lines, but the pace, the rhythm of this poem is absolutely wonderful.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Sorry to interrupt
Oh,
you.
no. I'll always be interrupted for praise, Charles. You can't write a book titled Headless without mentioning the guillotine.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to read this one. This is kind of like a little bit of a choral poem. It's kind of the state of the world now, and it's kind of the turning point of the book. Guillotine. The world has left us no choice but to rejoice in other people's deaths. A guillotine sensibility is inevitable when late-stage capitalism indeed wishes you late. The rouletting with other people's lives should be more worrisome than it is. So some CEO gets shot, a man with at least 3 homes spearheading a corporation that denies people insurance knowing they most likely will die as a result. And we are supposed to mourn? I mean, I know it's a life, and he probably wasn't even a bad guy, but it's just this walled-in society separates us from morality, the sheer mind-numbing overwhelm of news and minutia of other people's woes, the think tanks confirming that the shooter was unquestionably hot, and the fact that we do not step outside and engage with our neighbors or anyone, construct our own personal rotting picket fences. Daily life is a request for a silent Uber ride. Otherwise, progressive people do not talk to the help. I blame Downton Abbey. I could blame the parents, but they are too involved with their Candy Crush to interrupt. We could blame ourselves, but the guillotine is just so much more attractive. You know, the biggest disappointment of adulthood is the realization that there aren't any adults. You look around and all you see are bullies, nerds, and pretty girls on the playground. You're about 2 feet taller, and that is it. The world is a massive kindergarten at recess with no teachers but school shootings. I'm too old to learn the drills, so I will be next unless I stand behind a taller target. Thank God I'm only 5'8". Of course, I could just volunteer for the guillotine. It's either that or climate change or choking to death on microplastics. It will be worth it if I get Nicole Kidman's skin. But I smoked for 20 years, so I won't have that. Either wildfires or diabetes, maybe liver cancer will get me, since staying sober through this nightmare is not a raw, dogging feat I wish to attempt in this lifetime. But yes, back to the CEO. In khaki board shorts now, or some other humanizing profile pic on CNN. I kinda low-key hate the fact we are celebrating his demise, but I have been so drained of empathy, sympathy, humanity to care much. It got flooded out in 2016, it got burned out in 2024. This country does not care about anyone ever. Why should I? The guillotine is getting closer. I could manage without a head, a heart, a brain, courage, a home, or a soul. Robespierre, Robespierre, this current day is filled with your Holy Spirit. Jesus, some say, died for our sins. Some people take that as carte blanche to shoot CEOs dead or bash faggots or anoint the orange one in unctuous hair product oil. Zuckerberg will censor this. Bezos will burn me alive. Musk will spit on my grave. The guillotine will come for them. The guillotine comes for everyone. To survive, stay below notice, stand behind contempt, cloak yourself in sanctimoniousness, but hide when the time is right. Off to the mini-mart, to visit your dreaded in-laws, fly to Spain, whatever. I don't know. Live your life in such a way people do not rejoice in your death, right? Because if you are not doing that, you are doing it wrong. Or is everyone so evil? I just don't know anymore. Ethics is not taught in schools, just cheating and survival, keeping your head down and letting the chaos swirl around you. I mean, they dropped the word gay and teaching slavery, so tattoo platitudes to your face and hope that does the job. Or better yet, tattoo those same platitudes to your arms, legs, chest. They'll cut your head off. They always aim for your head. And you want people to be able to read you after you're dead, correct? You're not just another unsympathetic CEO, after all.
Wow.
Thank you. I'm going to read a few new poems from The Art Show, which is my manuscript that I just finished. That's at some contests, so
Good.
hope you enjoy them. One of my favorite works of political resistance is The Crucible by Arthur Miller. And as people who've read it know, he's writing about the Salem witchcraft trials, but he's really speaking about the McCarthy witch hunt in the 50s. Hisako Hibi was a Japanese American artist who was interned during World War II. Hisako Hibi. 1. As her world expanded after her internment ended, Hisako Hibi's paintings grew larger, more abstract. She no longer painted topaz, its dry, brittle harshness. She no longer captured still life, the inhumanity of separating people into us and them when the we is the only pronoun that matters in art. And that we is mesmerized by shapes, colors, figures, nuanced meanings, gradations of scale, and those pentimenti that depress us every time, tears for it all. So often, when we are stripped of humanity, we rush to art. Hisako rushed to it too when her own humanity was stripped away, flayed away by an insensate nation. We create art, we absorb art for the catharsis and connection, usually with someone we will never meet. I take her art and expand. I take her art and contract. Heartbeat. Hisako lost her early artwork. It was lost, waylaid, or destroyed before she was freed. I wonder if her heart expanded or contracted at that loss. 2. We love sharing our art. We want people to respond to it. But what we crave, what grounds us, what steers us through existence is art's compulsiveness. It nags at us until we express whatever that combative muse synapse wants us to express, or as consumers until we either respond with rage or swallow that proffered multicolored analgesic. Some art numbs quotidian pain, apolitical art like your mother's favorite Robert Kincaid. Or we select the Matrix red pill that wakes us up to injustice, Guernica, Weiwei, Basquiat, Kruger. America really hates its artists, but embraces fascism and internment. That is why we artists move beyond America to make art. 3. If this country took away my liberty, took away my poems, which it could do at any time, then I think my heart would contract, or maybe I would make the best of it and expand. Art survives until it doesn't. Artists survive until we don't. We keep returning to art, though, revolving around its persistent, mysterious light.
Wow.
The second piece I'm going to read is titled Rhythm Zero, and this is a performance art piece by Marina Abramovic. I think the poem kind of gives you an idea of what the piece was, but you should definitely Google it if you don't know. An apple, a sunflower, a razor blade, a gun. What will you choose to do with my body? Cherish it? Violate it? The choice is up to you. Do you like it? I have offered my body up for performance. I have denied myself agency, gifted you full control. It's yours to bless or ransack. I am merely a canvas, a latch key for your innermost self. An art show without repercussions. Former failed artists cannot resist temptation, simulation, transubstantiation, annihilation. Talented artists follow the light to capture a good likeness. They do at least until they consider the need to blur the lines and reflect deeper, darker impulses. What will you paint? What will you carve? What will you steal? What will you carry away? People say I am crazy, when in reality I have emptied myself of all semblance of being. I have retreated into an artist's statement. I am no longer of this body. I have become art, and you have become my murderer. Mm-hmm. Last art show poem, then I'll return to Headless for a few ending poems. David Hockney. I only went to one of those cool parties once, with hot trim men lounging by mid-century modern pools the shape of Rock Hudson's kidneys, strong drinks, lusty conversations, triangular patterns cast by swim-trunk shadows prodding the sun, casual maleness, sports mechanics betrayed by a rare theatrical shriek, emptiness reflected in water dangling from fibrils of chest hair. I swam in the abandoned pool. A reboot to the beauty contest I could never win. Some of the men were surely featured in pinup magazines as they lay dazed, corrupted by a quasi-LA brightness that Britt Hockney worshipped. Guests comparing feet sizes as metaphors for masculinity, a tryout for the orgies to come. Only a select few would receive an invite, an extra celery stalk in their Bloody Mary, a drunken grope in the background. I anchored myself firmly in a deck chair, a land hoe, if you must know, when the party condensed into a state of watercolor instability, as if inspired by chlorine fumes. I realized I preferred solitude or a hopper scene, an empty restaurant and some hot coffee. Being fully clothed seemed more appropriate to my character than being ignored in this faux California. I wasn't blonde enough, I wasn't tall enough, I wasn't hot or built enough, I wasn't thin. I was the sexless Capote guest invited on wit, and my kind of guest was only welcome for so long. I was not going to be fondled in the bacchanal. I thought, fuck David Hockney and other locust queers. I left before the gloaming had made up its mind to cast a more seductive light. Ironically, it grew so dark that even I could have been forgiven the cardinal sin in this world, being unwanted. This style of painting is an aesthetic I cannot enter. People talk about gatekeeping, but it's simply best insurance policy to keep your pool gated. I assume that is why the locked latch pinched a bit of my unappetizing flab, my unfortunate thigh, on my way out. The scar healed, but a second invitation never arrived. It seems I had the right amount of panache for an afternoon. White glare hot in temperature, shaved ice cool in reception.
Wow.
Thank you so much. So those are from my manuscript that's out at some contests, so wish me luck.
Oh.
And I'll finish with the three last poems in the book. We mentioned this one earlier. Last night I fucked Wilfred Owen's ghost. He looked so compact in his uniform, this old soul who looked as if he spent his youthful energies elsewhere, breaking the hearts of battalions with bashful smile and roguish Welsh grin. His eyes dreamt of adjectives to describe my body as he was fucking me, gently, since he tired of Warcraft and the sudden pounding of the brutish sort. We would have died happily if we had been killed in a foxhole by a casual, yet deadly accurate shelling. We talked about Keats and politics, savoring the post-coital cigarette cliché. What is sex but the longest-running cliché? I knew he would be killed on the morrow, right before the white flags were raised. He would relish the poetic irony. I would mourn the poetic injustice. He took my unshaved face in his hands and said, "At least we had this idol." I cried as the better poet left my bed. This penultimate poem, I love that word, is Vernissage. That is like the opening party at an art show before it goes on exhibit, like the big collectors, the friends, the family. Vernissage. Bared before the public, my limbs simply slabs of meat. My toes cannot splay for the feet fetishists. Buddha belly gripped, pregnant to me, more style. As if anyone could capture my artlessness, my imperfect form. The Greeks would laugh at me. Anyone who prizes symmetry would smash my marble-encased body. I look better in fragments. I can better keep my mystery if we turn the lights off when we do it. You only catch glimpses of my body through the twinkling of city lights. My personalities are both multiple and dull. My artist statement is a formality no one will stop to read at the art show of which we are all a part. At certain ages, you get more exhibitions of privilege or curse of youth, but people can sour on you. Until you are close to death or actually dead, then they love you again. Mortality is sex appeal, is cash is sex appeal. The art show is hard to define, but it is transactional and has so little to do with art. It is out in the open and behind closed doors. Never the closet, though. There's no room to hang art in there. It creates stares, however, hard to read stares, critical stares, discerning stares, hangry stares, because the cheese has run out. You wonder why they served cheap caviar with even cheaper Prosecco acidifying your intestines. But We are talking about the moments before display, those personal ones poets struggle to capture, the taunting, the seduction, the release, that precise moment before you show off your body to your lover, already bored, mentally swiping left for better options. During your downtime, you cherish the birthmark on your left thigh, that one only you know and love. A doctor once thought